Good morning. This is Sarwar Kashmiri, and you are listening to Polaris Live, a program that deals with the impact of a rapidly growing China on the world politics, business, and commerce. I'm here today to introduce a very distinguished guest, Ambassador Ed Kronenburg from Holland. Mr. Ed Kronenburg is a recently retired senior Dutch diplomat with a career spanning almost 45 years. His postings included ambassadorial positions in Beijing and Paris. He was Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Grand Master of the Royal Household of Her Majesty Queen Beatrix. His career also included secondments to the OECD as head of the Budget and Financial Services Division, the European Commission in Brussels as deputy head of Cabinet of Commissioner Hans van der Broek, and to NATO as Director of Cabinet Secretary General Jaap de Hoop Scheffer. During his postings to the permanent delegation of the Netherlands to the OECD, he was chairman of the OECD Budget Committee for 3 years. As the European Commission, in conjunction with the World Bank, he oversaw the European Commission's reconstruction efforts in the Balkans. He has supervisory responsibility in a number of foundations with the social outreach. We have invited him on to get his thoughts on China and China's rapid growth, and he's been kind enough to give us some time. So please welcome on Polaris Live, Ambassador Ed Kronenburg. Good morning, Mr. Ambassador.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. And I'm calling you from a rather cold and chilly morning in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Canada today. And how is it where you are?
It's almost exactly the same. It's beautiful weather. It's cold. It's a nice spring, or if you want, winter day in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Well, listen, it's very nice of you, as I say, to give some of your time to Polaris Live. We've had an election here in America, a change in administrations, and one of the issues on top of everybody's mind is whither goes American policy to China, whither goes the transatlantic relationship rebuilding. And I thought we might just want to start by asking you. You returned from China just a year ago as the Dutch ambassador there. You're a very perceptive ambassador. You've been through so many postings. And I thought I'd just ask you what might be some of the gateways from your experience in China. What stands out in your mind, Ambassador?
Well, what stands out, and I didn't have any previous experience. I've never been to China before. Neither had I been dealing with China from a policy point of view. So me, it was all entirely new. And the first impression is that you've got sort of the feeling that you leave a time capsule when you arrive in China.
Wow.
Well, it's my first sort of experience, so to speak, or my knowledge goes back a long way, 1975, 1976, when I joined the Dutch Foreign Service. Mao was still there, and all you knew about China was that it was a very communist country. Of course, it still is, but also very poor. And if you arrive suddenly in 2017, you arrive in a very developed country, a country which has put a lot of effort into its economic growth, which is, also from a, let's say, industrial point of view, second to none, and which has used its huge economic wealth and economic know-how to also be on the world stage, very much visible from a political and military point of view. And of course, I mean, what I realized at that point in time was that, at least speaking for myself and from, having been working mainly on European issues,
Right.
is that not many people at that point in time were very much aware of what was going on in China. And that has changed in the meantime over the past couple of years. I think now everybody has woken up to the fact that China is back. Although China may claim it has never been away, but it's very much back on the world scene.
Yes.
And showing us that it's back.
Quick question here. It was said that the Chinese always want to hide their light in a bushel, that they'd always been advised by Mao Zedong and others, to not go out and advertise their strength and greatness. Do you think that the change in Mr. Xi Jinping's tenure accounts for some of what you've just said, that people weren't aware, but now they are?
Well, absolutely so. Of course, it's the famous dictum of Deng Xiaoping, bide your time and hide your strength. I think that has been applied over the past 40 years. But I think President Xi has changed all that when he came to power in some 7 years ago. And I think he sort of felt it was about time to show China's strength. And this is a remarkable difference, I feel, from, let's say, the policy which had been conducted by China up until his arrival. But if something stands out from his predecessors, it's the fact that Xi Jinping has developed a very clear foreign policy for China, which is new for China, I feel, because that's not the way they've been dealing with the foreign policy issues prior to Xi Jinping. And it's new because the world still has come to grips with the fact that China, under the leadership of Xi Jinping, is developing this foreign policy approach.
So do you think, I mean, Xi Jinping obviously has, done these big initiatives, Belt and Road, which we can talk about in a moment. But what I want to tell you is the impression in America, Mr. Ambassador, that Mr. Xi Jinping has himself appointed for life, that he has a lifetime tenure now as president of China. But it is also my understanding that the Chinese Communist Party at its plenary meetings every year listens to him. And if he's not performing, if China isn't growing and moving in the direction he's promised, then his job may be at risk. But there are others who say, no, he can be president for life. You have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think nobody can be president or anything for life. I mean, there's an end to life anyway, as we know. But of course, he's given himself the possibility of, let's say, yet another term when his second term is up for renewal, and that's in about 2 years from now. It remains to be seen whether he will avail himself of that possibility.
Right.
It's still some time away. But at the same time, although he's sort of in charge of almost everything in China, he's also in charge of dealing with all the problems. And he's well aware of that. I think for China, it has always been, but it still is very important to continue its fight against poverty. Many people have been brought out of poverty over the past decades, but it's still a very important element of Chinese policy. He still wants to achieve a middle income status for China in some time in the future. He also is responsible for economic growth, which is now being projected in the 14th five-year plan, which is discussed as we speak, which has to be approved next year. And it's not only about employment, it's not only about continuing growth in the economy, it's also guiding China into a period where they will be less depend on exports, more on internal consumption, and having economic growth also partly driven by their domestic economy. It's very much about climate and the environment, which is also a very important element in Chinese policy, but also for the Chinese population.
Right.
It's about food and food security. It's also about taking care of the elderly, because China has an aging population, and the aging issue is rather more important in China than elsewhere in the world because of the one-child policy. If you look at demographic developments, China will have to take care of elderly people in millions. I think as we speak, I think a certain population, but I have to check my statistics here, is already over the age of 60, and of course that will increase as time goes on. So these are all challenges for which Xi Jinping has also sort of claimed responsibility.
So very different. Sorry, please keep going.
No. So he will have to deliver on all these topics.
Right.
And of course, China has always known sort of collective leadership. Now I think it's more into the hands of one person, although of course he's very much supported by his own ministers and by the Communist Party. But yet, I mean, he has to deliver.
So this is a very different picture, Mr. Ambassador, that you're painting from a Stalinist type of leader. This is you're almost describing him, if I may use the word, as a pseudo-democratic person. I mean, not in the sense that people vote him in and out, but that he has some responsibility to a group and has to keep proving himself. And I think that is really, really interesting. What I may say, what I'd like to ask you is, tied in with this is the Belt and Road Initiative, which is his big project to increase influence and connect China to over 100 countries and so on. He has made it part of the Chinese constitution. Do you think that this is an attempt by China to increase its soft power, to connect itself, increase its influence, so that over the next 2 decades or so that it connects itself commercially? And related to that, if you could also talk about the fact that when America talks of alliances, it's usually in terms of a semi-military situation with bases and protection and so on. And that's not the case on China. So 2 complicated questions, but I'll just throw them to you.
Well, I think the Belt and Road Initiative, which is already 7 years old, is very much an example of the influence that China, Xi Jinping, wants to exercise across the Belt and Road itinerary. Yes, it is very much soft power, trying to gain influence, but at the same time, the Belt and Road still has to sort of show results.
Right.
Let me explain. Yes, I mean, I've experienced when I was in China, there were very important meetings on the Belt and Road Initiative, also at the highest level. And of course, projects have been undertaken in the framework of Belt and Road. But so far, and these are, the sort of objective statistics, almost 90% or more of the projects have been carried out by Chinese companies. And I think the idea, at least as it was perceived by other countries outside of China, was that also other countries would largely benefit from those projects, not in terms of having the road or having the infrastructure, but also being able to provide jobs to people in the countries concerned. And
right.
All of that has in many cases yet to materialize. And I don't know, but if you would talk to some of the countries, also in Europe, that signed up quite early through an MOU for the Belt and Road Initiative, I think some of them are still really waiting to see what's going to happen. It's maybe early days, but I think we still need some time to see whether this is really going to be the very success that China had in mind when it launched the whole idea.
I talked last week on this program with the CEO of a very old Trieste company who negotiated recently for a long time, over a year, with a German company and a Chinese company to take over part ownership of the port. And he surprised me by saying that his experience was the Chinese come very well prepared, that they have a good understanding of the legal system in Europe, that they themselves want to make sure they dot the I's and cross the T's. I always seem to rather unimaginatively think that when the Chinese came to buy something in the West, they brought the suitcase full of money, and that they pretty much wanted their own way. And in this case, the Chinese company did not win, the German company won. But does this surprise you that they come in with an appreciation of Western law, and in fact, they try to rigorously think about how they'll apply Chinese systems to it? Does this surprise you, or you saw a lot of that when you were there?
No, it doesn't surprise me because they're always very well prepared. They know what they talk about. When I had my meetings, bilateral meetings in Beijing, dealing with the officials and the various ministries concerned, they were always very well informed, very well prepared. So it doesn't surprise me at all that also from the business point of view, they have the same approach. This is the way the Chinese work. They take no chances. They are a bit, I would say, almost risk averse. So they really want to tick all the boxes before they try to do something. So I'm not surprised at all. Although I must say, they have very much their own culture. So sometimes it's one thing to prepare from a legal or financial or economic point of view, your business case. But it's also very important to know the environment you're going to work in. What's the background? What's the culture? What's the history? I mean, it's important for us in dealing with China, but it also applies for the Chinese dealing with countries outside of China.
Sure.
And I think that's something, we have to work on in dealing with China, but also the other way around. It also applies to the Chinese in dealing with other countries.
So do you think that China is bent on spreading its ideology around the world, as the Soviet Union used to do? There's this big debate in American think tanks and academic circles, and I myself am questioning that. I don't know whether that is really true. I think China is more business than ideology. Can you shed some light on that?
I agree with you. I think it's more on influence rather than on ideology. And I would almost say it's not very Chinese to want to spread your own ideology, because it's never been like that. That doesn't mean to say it can't change. But if you look at its history, China has always been sort of, let's say, been very well, how shall I put it, has been very comfortable in, dealing with things within its own borders.
Yes.
Didn't have a lot of enthusiasm for foreign policy ideas or initiatives. It wants to be respected for what it is. That's a different story. Who doesn't? But it's not in their sort of culture, or as I would see it, attitude, that they want to spread their ideology. They're not very eager to link up. I would say with other countries in that respect. So I think it's more on influence. Has more an economic background. Yes, and of course they want to learn, and they want to sometimes get their hands on very interesting technology. But that's a different story. So I think the comparison with the sort of Russian ideology is not appropriate in this case.
So listen, in this small amount of time we have left, I want to ask you now, switch across the Atlantic. In the last 4 years, we've had a presidency that's been a lot different from previous ones in the way institutions, beliefs, alliances and various treaties have been recognized or put aside. We now have a presidency coming in that everybody is lauding as going back to the way things were going to be. What I want to ask you is it really going to be that easy for America's allies to say, oh, great, now we go back, we're all friends again, allies again, like we used to be 5 years ago? Do you not think that America needs to sit back and think about how the republic, its democracy, could be taken over, and I'm exaggerating the use of that phrase, taking over, by somebody with very different beliefs? And how are the allies to know that we would not go back 5 years from now right there? Should we not be looking at some of our institutions and democracy and trying to fix things? The Constitution is a wonderful document, but it's 200 years old. I'm just throwing out some ideas that have occurred to me.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, fine. Okay, sorry.
No.
Well, I don't think things will sort of go back automatically to where we were 4 years ago. I mean, things never go back like this in you know, these sort of important. I mean, time has moved on, but it's interesting to see, you know, also for Europeans, what this all means for us. And as you say, I mean, in 4 years from now, we'll have elections again in United States. So I think we also, from a European point of view, would have to ask ourselves what sort of efforts would the new administration be comfortable with in dealing with the Europeans. And my view is that, you know, there was, of course, some uneasiness, there was some unpredictability, also about the alliance, of course, with the United States. And I think it has shown the Europeans that they have to take more responsibility for, let's say, their own security, which I think would be also very much in support of the new US administration, because then they would be able to say that it's not just for the US, but also for their allies, the European democracies, to support the US to work on things together when it comes to uphold our common values. I think that's a very important lesson for the Europeans. So if there's one thing we have to do, is to show the new American administration that we are very serious about taking our own share of the responsibility in underpinning our own security. I think that's very important. So we should not sit back and relax. Definitely not. We should also show our American friends that we want to shoulder part of that responsibility. I think that's the way it should go.
Do you think that coordinating policy strategy towards China between the U.S. and Europe might be one way to help repair this rift, if I may call it, which is too strong a word probably, give us a major project to work together? Or is that very difficult?
No, I don't think it's difficult. I think, you know, the basics when it comes to, mainly from the economic point of view with regard to China, it's about trying to create the level playing field and the reciprocity, which has been an issue which already was very much under discussion before your current president came into office 4 years ago. And that's still a very important topic, also in the conversations with the Chinese. And obviously, the point has always been made also by the European Union. Yes. So if you do it in concert and you want to play by the rules, and if you want to uphold the rule book of the WTO, fine. I think that would actually help. It should not be perceived as a sort of ganging up against one or the other. Right. But I think we need United States and we need the European Union also collectively in order to make the international system work. And open markets are very much part of that. And this is, I think, where we could have a very useful dialogue with the Chinese, because the points which have been made also by our current presidents are very valid when it comes to these topics.
Let me ask you, It seems as though the European Union strategy recently formulated as a stiff competitor, China as a stiff competitor. On the American side, it's a little more than competition. It's almost a aggressive, in your eye, contain them policy, which is not the way the Europeans, it seems to me, want to work. So will both sides have to give a little bit? The Europeans become more aggressive. The Americans need to tame their side of it?
Well, also from a European angle, you may recall that last year, the European Commission labeled China as a systemic rival.
Yes.
Which, you know, it's probably more or less along the lines of the US position. But at the same time, I mean, China is there. It's very much a part of the globalization effort. So one way or the other, we have to deal with China. But I believe that, you know, if we have things we do not appreciate about the way they approach things, we simply very clearly have to tell them. And, you know, we've told them over the past, you know, I don't know how many years, and there has been occasionally some progress. I mean, let me remind you that also the US administration concluded the first part of a trade agreement in January of this year.
Yes.
With the Chinese. The second part has yet to be concluded. Now, obviously, nobody knows how the new administration will proceed. Will they continue these talks?
Indeed.
Because the second part was actually quite important. It was more important than the first part, because the second part was all about, let's say, the position of the state-owned enterprises, the level playing field, the subsidies. And I think the Europeans feel exactly the same about that. So I think we could sort of, you know, I won't say join forces, but we could jointly approach the Chinese and say, you know, what do you think, what you're going to do about it? At the same time, and this is also happening as we speak almost, you know, a couple of weeks ago, I learned that very important American banks, Goldman Sachs, have invested a huge amount of money in China.
Yes.
It's a wholly foreign-owned enterprise. So, you know, things are happening. Financially, the financial markets are opening up, but there's still more to be done. And I think the US and the EU could actually join forces in trying to make it work to the benefit of all of us.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, we are fast running out of time. I have so many other things I wanted to talk with you about. We could talk on for most of today, but you have much more important things to do.
I wouldn't dare say so.
Perhaps we can have you back again in the new year after the Biden administration has found its sea legs, so to speak. And but in the meantime, let me just say what a pleasure it was to have you, your forthright conversation, and thank you for giving us part of your day.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.